Secrets have a distinct scent, especially when laced with illegal suppressants and sheer panic. Stepping up to the altar at the Washington National Cathedral, wearing a heavily tailored tuxedo that belonged to someone else, was a death sentence. To the world, a perfect marriage. Behind closed doors, pure psychological warfare. McDonnell Aerospace was bleeding out. For 3 generations, our family had secured the most lucrative defense contracts in the country. But after 2 consecutive failed prototype phases for a multi-billion-dollar DARPA stealth drone initiative, we were facing total liquidation. Lockheed Martin was circling like vultures, ready to pick our legacy apart. The only lifeline was a social and political alliance forged in desperation, an arranged binding between the golden child of the McDonnell family, my identical twin brother Liam, and the youngest 4-star general at the Pentagon, Agustin Carter. Liam was the quintessential Omega. He possessed a delicate, submissive nature, a flawless academic record from Georgetown University, and a natural pheromone signature that smelled of ripe peaches and spun sugar. He was a prize. I, on the other hand, was the shadow. I was born an Omega, but I despised the vulnerability it brought. Since I was 16, I had been visiting a discreet, highly illegal underground clinic in Adams Morgan, where Dr. Harrison Gallagher prescribed me heavy, military-grade inhibitors. I suppressed my dynamic, flattened my scent to a neutral static, and worked deep in the engineering bowels of our company, passing as a beta. The arrangement was set. The invitations were embossed. The media was in a frenzy over the union of old defense money and new military power. Then, 3 days before the binding ceremony, Liam vanished. He didn't just leave. He fled to Mykonos with a freelance beta photographer he had been secretly seeing for months. He left nothing but a hastily scribbled note on his stationery and a family on the brink of absolute ruin. When our father, Richard MacDonald, found the note, he didn't call the authorities. He called me into his office, locked the mahogany doors, and told me I was going to save the family. The physical resemblance between Liam and me was uncanny, flawless to the naked eye. But the biology of an Omegaverse binding is unforgiving. In our society, high-ranking military alphas like General Carter do not simply exchange rings. They demand a ceremonial pre-mark, a physical, ritualistic branding on the Omega's scent gland, infused with their natural pheromones, which the alpha then bites over during the consummation to make the bond permanent. Liam had already received his pre-mark. A delicate, intricate crest of the Carter family had been tattooed into his delicate neck tissue, saturated with his peach-sweet scent. To take his place, I had to surrender my own unmarked status. I had kept my scent gland pristine, untouched, a silent rebellion against the biology that tried to define me. Losing it felt like stripping away my very soul. Dr. Gallagher's clinic smelled of antiseptic and ozone when I walked in at 2 in the morning. The procedure was barbaric. Because my suppressed scent, a sharp, bitter petrichor and crushed almond, would immediately betray me to an alpha of Carter's caliber, Gallagher had to chemically burn my natural gland, effectively muting it, and graft a synthetic, biocompatible silicone patch over the scarring. The patch was engineered to perfectly mimic the texture of Liam's skin, complete with an identical Carter crest tattoo. But the worst part was the scent reservoir. Embedded beneath the graft was a slow-release synthetic pheromone pump, filled with a synthesized version of Liam's peach and sugar scent. The pain was blinding. I gripped the leather arms of the medical chair until my knuckles split, biting down on a rubber guard while the laser seared my flesh. I surrendered my true identity, my physical autonomy, and my unblemished mark, all to wear my brother's ghost. 72 hours later, I stood in the cavernous nave of the Washington National Cathedral. The air was thick with the scent of lilies, polished stone, and the overwhelming, suffocating aura of hundreds of elite alphas and omegas. The Mayflower Hotel had catered the event, and the opulence was nauseating. But none of it mattered the second I laid eyes on him. General Agustin Carter stood at the end of the aisle. He was a monument of a man, clad in his immaculately pressed dress blues, a chest full of commendations glittering under the cathedral lights. But it was his presence that stopped the breath in my lungs. His pheromones hit me like a physical shockwave, crushed cedar, gunpowder, and the chilling static of an approaching thunderstorm. It was an alpha aura so dominant, so entirely apex, that my chemically suppressed instincts violently clawed at the inside of my mind, demanding I submit, demanding I bare my neck. I forced myself to walk forward. I mirrored Liam's practiced, demure smile. I kept my eyes lowered, my posture soft and compliant, fighting the rigid tension in my muscles. Every step felt like walking toward a firing squad. When my father placed my hand in Agustin's, the general's grip was like a steel vice. His skin was warm, his palms calloused from years of combat and command. He didn't look at me with love, or even affection. His dark, piercing eyes locked onto mine with the cold, calculating precision of a sniper adjusting his scope. "You look breathtaking, my Omega," Agustin murmured, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that vibrated straight through my chest. "Thank you, Alpha," I replied, forcing my voice into the softer, slightly higher register Liam naturally possessed. The ceremony was a blur of ancient Latin vows and flashing cameras. When the priest finally declared us bound in the eyes of the state and the dynamic, Agustin leaned in for the ceremonial kiss. As his lips brushed mine, his nose grazed the edge of my collar, hovering mere millimeters from the synthetic graft on my neck. I stopped breathing. The scent pump was working, flooding the space between us with artificial peaches, but I was terrified he would smell the burnt flesh and terror lying just beneath it. He lingered for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. A cold shiver cascaded down my spine. Then he pulled back, a completely unreadable expression carved into his striking features. "Till death," he whispered, a promise that sounded terrifyingly like a threat. The reception at the Mayflower was an exercise in pure endurance. I smiled until my jaw ached, sipping ginger ale disguised as champagne, nodding along to the endless congratulations from senators, defense contractors, and foreign dignitaries. Agustin remained at my side, his hand a constant heavy weight on the small of my back. To the onlookers, he was the fiercely protective alpha guarding his new mate. To me, it felt like the firm grip of a warden ensuring his prisoner didn't bolt. It wasn't until midnight that the black armored SUV pulled up to the curb to take us to Agustin's private estate in Alexandria, Virginia. The vehicle was soundproofed, the privacy partition raised, sealing us in a claustrophobic cocoon of rich leather and Agustin's suffocating cedar and gunpowder scent. I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap, staring out the tinted windows at the blurred lights of the Potomac River. "You're uncharacteristically quiet, Liam," Agustin said, the silence breaking like a snapped wire. I flinched internally but kept my exterior soft. "It's just been a long day, Agustin. I'm overwhelmed. It's a lot to take in." "I imagine it is," he replied smoothly. He reached over, his large fingers gently tracing the line of my jaw. I forced myself to lean into the touch, a classic Omega submission display. A new home, a new life, a whole new reality. There was a strange inflection on the word reality, but I brushed it off as my own paranoia. I had spent the last 3 days memorizing Liam's diaries, his texts, his mannerisms. I knew that Liam preferred Earl Grey tea with exactly 1 cube of sugar, that he was terrified of thunderstorms, and that he feigned an interest in modern art to impress our mother's friends. I was heavily armed with my brother's entire persona. I just had to survive the consummation. The biting of the mark. If the room was dark enough, if I could guide his teeth to the exact coordinates of the silicone graft, the synthetic blood packets beneath the surface would rupture, mimicking the biological completion of the bond. It was a massive, fatal gamble, but it was the only play I had. The Alexandria estate was a sprawling, colonial-era fortress surrounded by high walls and state-of-the-art security systems. As we stepped through the heavy oak double doors, the vast emptiness of the foyer echoed around us. There were no servants in sight. Agustin had dismissed the staff for the week of our honeymoon. We were entirely alone. "I'll have your bags brought up to the master suite," Agustin said, shedding his uniform jacket and draping it over a mahogany chair. He moved with a predatory grace, rolling up the sleeves of his crisp white shirt, exposing corded forearms. "Would you care for a drink before we retire, to calm your nerves?" "A glass of water would be wonderful, thank you," I said softly, playing the demure Omega. "Nonsense. A celebration calls for something stronger." Augustin walked over to a crystal decanter resting on a silver tray. He poured a generous measure of amber liquid into a tumbler. "Macallan 18. Neat. Just the way we like it, isn't it?" My heart slammed against my ribs. I froze. Macallan 18. I frantically combed through my mental encyclopedia of Liam. Liam despised whiskey. It made him gag. He only ever drank sweet white wines or excessively fruity cocktails. I drank Macallan 18. It was my drink of choice during late-night engineering crunches at the office. Did he know? Or was it just a test? Or an honest mistake? "Oh!" I forced a light, melodic laugh, waving a hand dismissively. "You know me, Alpha. Whiskey is a bit too harsh for my palate. I'd much prefer a Riesling if you have it." Agustin paused. He held the crystal tumbler up to the dim lighting, studying the amber liquid for a long, agonizing moment. Then he smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Of course," he murmured, setting the glass down. "My mistake? Peaches and Riesling. Sweet things for a sweet Omega." He closed the distance between us in 3 long strides. Before I could process the movement, he had backed me up against the cool plaster of the hallway wall. Both of his hands came up, bracing on the wall on either side of my head, caging me in. His towering frame blocked out the light, his chest brushing against mine. His pheromones spiked, thick and dominant, an aggressive interrogator demanding answers. My engineered patch pumped out a frantic burst of synthetic peach scent in response to my rising panic. "Agustin," I breathed, letting my voice tremble exactly the way Liam's would. He leaned down, his face inches from mine. His nose trailed along my jawline, deliberately, agonizingly slow, inhaling deeply. "You smell perfect," he whispered, his breath hot against my ear. "Exactly the same as you did at the gala last month. Exactly the same as the day we signed the contract." Thank you, but that's the problem. Isn't it, bon temps, isn't it?" Agustin's voice dropped to a lethal, quiet register. His thumb moved to the side of my neck, right over the raised edge of the Carter crest. He didn't caress it. He pressed down, hard. Biology is beautifully chaotic. An omega's scent shifts with fear, with exhaustion, with arousal. But yours has been mathematically static for the last 12 hours. It smells like a perfume counter, not a living, breathing mate. Panic seized my throat. I tried to pull away, to play the offended spouse. "You're hurting me, Alpha. Please, stop," Augustine commanded, the sheer alpha resonance in his voice making my knees buckle instinctively. He caught me by the waist, effortlessly holding me upright against the wall. His dark eyes burned with a mixture of dark amusement and cold fury. "Stop insulting my intelligence, and stop defiling my house with this pathetic pantomime." He reached into his slacks and pulled out a small, crushed silver blister pack. He held it up between us. My blood ran cold. It was an empty sleeve of the highly illegal, custom-synthesized inhibitors I bought from Dr. Gallagher. I have commanded divisions in 3 different war zones. I sit on intelligence boards that monitor global threats. Did you and your desperate father truly believe you could smuggle a black market medical proxy into my bed without me knowing? Augustine sneered, his thumb tracing the jagged scar tissue just beneath the edge of my synthetic graft, the part Gallagher couldn't completely smooth over. "Where is he?" I choked out, dropping the soft, melodic pitch. My real voice, deeper, rougher from years of shouting over aircraft engines, echoed in the silent hall. "Where is Liam?" Augustine's smile was terrifying. It was the smile of a general who had just successfully executed a brilliant, devastating trap. "Liam is currently enjoying a very secure, heavily monitored permanent vacation at a black site in Eastern Europe. He was intercepted in Mykonos 48 hours ago," Augustine stated calmly. My vision swam. You knew? You knew he ran?" "I facilitated his escape," Augustine corrected, stepping back, though his oppressive aura still pinned me to the wall. He picked up the glass of Macallan 18, taking a slow sip. He looked at me, his eyes dark with a possessive, consuming hunger that stripped away all my defenses. "Liam was a vapid, useless doll, a political pawn I agreed to on paper. But you, Osbert, the brilliant, defiant, suppressed beta mimic who designed the very stealth tech your incompetent father failed to manufacture. You were always the prize I intended to claim." He stepped forward again, his hand reaching out to firmly grasp the back of my neck. His thumb rested heavily on the fake silicone mark I had endured hell to acquire. "Now," the cruel Alpha General whispered, "let's take this piece of plastic off your neck, Osbert. I want to taste your real blood." Cold dread paralyzed my limbs as Augustine's words settled over me like a heavy, suffocating shroud. He knew. He had orchestrated every single piece of this agonizing chess game, letting my father and me believe we were executing a desperate ruse, when in reality, we were walking blindly into his perfectly laid trap. Augustine's large hand remained clamped against the back of my neck, his thumb resting heavily on the synthetic silicone graft. He didn't rip it off immediately. Instead, he forced me to look at him, his dark eyes ablaze with a terrifying mixture of predatory triumph and deep, unrestrained obsession. "Did you honestly think your father's failing defense company was worth a lifetime binding to a vapid socialite?" Augustine's voice was a low, rumbling purr that vibrated against my chest. "When your father offered Liam, I nearly laughed him out of the Pentagon. But then, my intelligence officers ran a deep background sweep on McDonald Aerospace. They found the erased files, Osbert, the encrypted beta phase blueprints for the DARPA stealth drone project. The blueprints your father rejected because they were designed by his defective Omega son rather than his hired Alpha engineers. He stepped closer, backing me further into the wall. Your mind is a weapon, Osbert. A beautiful, jagged weapon. You designed a radar-absorbent metamaterial that could change the landscape of modern warfare, and your idiot father buried it because he was ashamed of your dynamic. I didn't want Liam. I wanted the true architect. I wanted you. A sharp, hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat. So you blackmailed my family, kidnapped my twin brother, and forced me into a fraudulent marriage ceremony. For a patent? For a partnership, Agustin corrected smoothly, his other hand moving to my waist, pulling me flush against his hard frame. And for a mate who is actually my equal. With a swift, precise motion, Agustin pulled a small vial of military-grade solvent from his slacks, the kind used to dissolve field bandages. He cracked the seal with his teeth. Before I could struggle, he pressed a chemically soaked cloth against my neck. The adhesive bonding, the silicone graft to my scarred flesh, began to melt instantly. The sensation was revolting, a wet peeling accompanied by a sharp, burning sting as the raw skin underneath was exposed to the air. I hissed, my hands coming up to shove at his broad chest, but it was like pushing against a concrete pillar. "Hold still," Agustin commanded, the alpha resonance in his voice making my suppressed biology whimper in forced submission. He gripped the edge of the fake Carter crest and ripped the silicone patch away. The artificial peach and sugar scent vanished, sucked out of the air by the heavy ventilation of the hallway. In its place, bursting forth from the chemically burned but still living gland beneath, was my true scent. It flooded the corridor in seconds, a sharp electric burst of petrichor, crushed almonds, and the bitter tang of ozone. It was an angry, defensive scent, the smell of a storm breaking. Agustin inhaled sharply, his chest expanding as he drank in my true pheromones. His pupils dilated until his eyes were almost entirely black, the dominant alpha aura rolling off him transformed from cold and calculating to fiercely, violently possessive. "Perfect," he breathed, his voice rough with sudden feral hunger. No more hiding, no more suppressants. He tossed the silicone graft onto the marble floor. Without another word, he swept me off my feet, easily carrying me up the sweeping grand staircase toward the master wing of the estate. I fought him then, thrashing in his arms, striking his shoulders, my true Omega instincts warring violently with my conscious defiance. The scent of rain and almonds clashed with his suffocating cedar and gunpowder, creating a heavy, intoxicating miasma in the air. He kicked the heavy mahogany doors of the master bedroom open and tossed me onto the massive, silk-draped bed. I scrambled backward, my heart hammering against my ribs, but Agustin was already unbuttoning his crisp white shirt, discarding it onto the floor. "You belong to me, Osbert," Agustin said, crawling onto the mattress, his massive frame caging me against the plush headboard. "Your mind, your patents, your future. And in exchange I will give you the one thing your family never did. Absolute power." He didn't give me time to process the offer. He lunged, pinning my wrists above my head with one hand. His mouth descended on mine, a bruising, demanding kiss that stole the air from my lungs. It wasn't tender. It was a conquest. And as his lips trailed down my jaw, settling over the raw, exposed and unmarked flesh of my true scent gland, I realized the terrifying truth. I hadn't surrendered my mark to save my twin. I had walked right into the jaws of a wolf who had been hunting me all along. Then his teeth broke the skin, Fire erupted in my veins. The biological tether of the Omegaverse bond snapped into place with earth-shattering force. As his pheromones flooded my bloodstream, binding our nervous systems together, the world faded to black, leaving only the scent of gunpowder, cedar, and the inescapable reality of my new master. Sunlight pierced the heavy velvet curtains, casting harsh, geometric lines of gold across the king-sized bed. I awoke with a gasp, my body trembling from the physical and psychological aftershocks of the permanent claim. My neck pulsed with a deep, rhythmic ache. I reached up with a shaking hand, my fingers brushing the raised, swollen tissue where Agustine's teeth had permanently scarred me. The true Carter mark. My veins hummed with a foreign energy, a biological devotion engineered by millions of years of evolution, screaming at me to seek out the alpha who had claimed me, to submit, to serve. It took every ounce of my willpower to push those instincts down into the dark, locked boxes of my mind. I sat up, dragging the silk sheet around my chest. Agustine was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, already dressed in crisp slacks and a tailored vest, a cup of black coffee in his hand. He was watching me with a smug, deeply satisfied expression. The scent of cedar in the room was overwhelming, marking the territory, marking me. "Good morning, my Omega," Agustine said, his voice laced with absolute authority. "Where are my suppressants?" I rasped, my throat raw. "Incinerated," Agustine replied simply, taking a sip of his coffee. "You won't be needing them anymore. I expect my mate to smell like my mate. You will embrace your dynamic, Osbert, or the transition will be agonizing for you." He walked over to the bed, reaching out to trace the angry red bite mark on my neck. I forced myself not to flinch, though the bond hummed with a treacherous warmth at his touch. "Later today, my legal team will finalize the acquisition of McDonald Aerospace," Agustine continued, his tone shifting to pure business. "Your father has been ousted by the board. With my military backing, we will take the company private. You will take your rightful place as head of research and development. We will build your stealth drones, and we will own the skies." He smiled, a victor surveying his newly conquered lands. He thought he had won. He thought he had broken me down to my biological components and rebuilt me into his perfect obedient weapon. He underestimated the shadow. I let out a slow, deliberate breath. I leaned back against the pillows, letting the sheet slip slightly, projecting a picture of relaxed confidence that I absolutely did not feel. "That sounds like a brilliant strategy, General," I said smoothly, using my real, deeper voice. "Except for one minor logistical issue." Agustine frowned slightly, his hand pausing on my neck. "And what is that?" "The beta phase blueprints your intelligence officers stole from my father's servers." I tilted my head, looking him dead in the eye. "They are useless. They are a decoy framework. I engineered them specifically to look complete to outside contractors, but they are missing the core algorithmic matrix required to stabilize the metamaterial during high-Mach flight." Agustine's eyes narrowed, the smugness evaporating instantly. "You're lying. My engineers verified the physics. Your engineers are alphas who think brute force equations solve aerodynamic friction," I mocked gently. "The real algorithmic matrix? The one that actually makes the drone invisible to thermal and radar targeting? It doesn't exist on any server." I tapped my temple with a slender finger. "It's up here. And the encryption key required to input the final sequence into the manufacturing AI is biologically locked." Agustin set his coffee cup down on the nightstand with a sharp clack. His pheromones spiked with anger, but beneath it I smelled something else. Surprise, and a dark, thrilling respect. I embedded a biometric dead man switch into the McDonald mainframe years ago, anticipating my father might try to steal my work, I explained, leaning forward. The system requires my specific retinal scan, my voice print, and my active, willing input. If you try to force the code, or if you try to torture it out of me, the mainframe wipes the entire DARPA project permanently. The silence in the bedroom was deafening. The power dynamic, previously tipped entirely in the general's favor, suddenly leveled out into a razor-thin tightrope. I had surrendered my mark, yes. He had claimed my body and bound my biology to his. But I held the keys to the empire he desperately wanted to build. Liam is safe, I stated, shifting from defense to offense. You will release him from the black site immediately. You will fund his life in Europe, and he will never return to the States. My father gets nothing. He rots in his own financial ruin. Agustin stared at me, his jaw clenched tight. The alpha in him raged at the defiance, but the brilliant tactician recognized a flawless checkmate. "And what do you get, Osbert?" Agustin whispered, leaning over me, his hands bracing on either side of my hips. "I get my lab," I answered, meeting his intense gaze without wavering. "I get full control over my designs, and I get the guarantee that we rule this empire together as equals, not Alpha and Omega. Partners." A slow, terrifying grin spread across Agustin Carter's face. The anger in his scent dissipated, replaced by a heavy, intoxicating wave of pure lust and admiration. He leaned down, pressing his forehead against mine, his thumb tracing the bite mark he had forced upon me. "You are a magnificent, ruthless creature, Osbert," Agustin breathed, sealing our toxic, unbreakable pact. "I look forward to conquering the world with you." The trap had been sprung, the mark had been bitten, and the deception had ended. I had walked into the lion's den as a sacrifice, but I refused to be devoured. Instead, I put a leash on the beast, and together we were going to build an empire on the ashes of those who underestimated us. Did this intense Omegaverse tale of deception, power, and high-stakes survival keep you on the edge of your seat? If you loved the toxic twists, the battle of wits, and the enemies-to-partners dynamic between Osbert and the General, be sure to hit that like button. Share this story with your fellow drama lovers, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more dark, thrilling, and heart-pounding original fiction. Drop a comment below with your favorite plot twist.